video is about doing research in the area of professional responsibility. So doing research in the area of professional responsibility is similar to research that we did for a couple of things, court rules, and in some ways when we're looking for opinions on point, it might be looking at similar to what we did when we looked at administrative law decisions. So these are the steps or the process. We're going to identify the issue. So is it something that has to do with client funds, for example? We're going to read the primary law, so the state rules of professional responsibility. We're going to search for state cases that are interpreting that rule. We're going to look for state ethics opinions. And we can also read the comments that follow the rule to help us understand the rule of professional responsibility. We can refer to other state cases interpreting a rule that's similar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ABA model rule and how most of the states have adopted that model rule. So a lot of times the state rules of professional responsibility might be similar in the states. So if we needed persuasive authority, if we needed to go outside of our jurisdiction, we might look for state cases interpreting a similar rule. We can look at those ABA materials, and we can also look for other secondary source materials. So I kind of alluded to this in the last slide, but when you're researching ethical issues, you want to keep in mind that our attorneys are admitted to a practice in a particular state. So we're really looking for mandatory authority in the state where the legal issue has come about. So here's the hierarchy of authority. It's going to sound very familiar to other research issues. We have the Constitution, statutes, case law. Obviously, the state rule of professional responsibility in the state that you're in. Court decisions, so state court decisions interpreting those rules. And sometimes state ethics opinions are considered mandatory authority. It depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. So I've broken this is a list of persuasive authorities, and I've broken it into formal ethics opinions and informal ethics opinions. That terminology is really something used by the ABA, and sometimes the states don't use that exact terminology. And I want you to keep in mind that for state opinions, it can depend on which jurisdiction you're in. I've given you a link to a web page. It's sort of an older page. Let's just take a quick look at it, though, so you can see how it might be helpful. Okay, so this is the page here, and I know that you might not be able to see it too well. It does date from 1996, but what it does is it lists every state, the process that the state goes through to issue ethics opinions, and what the authority is. So in Alabama, for example, the ethics opinions bind the state bar, but if we look at Arizona, we can see that those opinions are advisory only. So you would have to update this because it's from 1996, but at least it gives you a sense of what the process is in the state. And for our research, we're going to be looking for ethics opinions in the state, regardless of whether they're mandatory or persuasive authority in the state. So you're always going to be looking for those from a research perspective. It just depends on how much weight the court would give it. That's the difference. Okay, so the next area we have are disciplinary proceedings. So if someone makes a complaint against an attorney, we can find those disciplinary proceedings, and secondary sources like the restatement. So let's talk a little bit about the current ABA model rules of professional conduct. It's been adopted in 49 states. Now when it's adopted, it can be adopted as is, which is very unlikely, or it can be adopted. States can adopt certain rules but not others, or they can adopt rules and change the wording of it. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. We want to look at the mandatory authority in our state, but the ABA annotated model rules can be helpful for us to understand a particular rule. And because it's been adopted in all the states, it also means in 49 of the states, we can look to other states if we need to help us understand the rule, see how other courts have interpreted the rule or a similar rule. But again, this is a model rule. So as with other model codes and rules, it's not the law in your state. What the law in your state is the rules of professional conduct that have been adopted in the state. Okay. So I've just given you a couple of different ways to find the model rules of professional conduct, depending on which database you're in. Also a link to the online version, which is an unannotated version at the ABA website. There's also an annotated version available in print. What I want to do now is to go into Westlaw Classic and Lexis.com and show you how to find all the ethics materials, including the model rules of professional conduct, by going in by topic. Okay, so I am on Westlaw Classic. I'm going to hit the directory and I'm going to go topical practice areas, and then what they call it on Westlaw is legal ethics. So I need L, legal ethics and professional responsibility. And I know you can't see this too well on your screen, but it gives you federal cases, federal statutes, federal administrative materials, state cases, state rules. So there's a lot of really important material here. What we were just talking about was the ABA model rules, and that's here under the American Bar Association materials, ABA, Annotated Model Rules of Professional Conduct. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on Lexis. We're on the main Lexis page. We're going to go area of law by topic. Of course, since we're on a different database, they call it something different. They call it ethics. But they have similar materials here. They have statutes and rules, they have cases, they have legal ethics opinions, and they have secondary source materials. The sources that we were just talking about are the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct, which are here. They also have a database called ABA Codes and Ethics Opinions Combined, so you can search the code and opinions that interpret the code, ABA opinions that interpret the code provisions. You can find these here online in Lexis in this combined database. Okay, so that's a little bit about the ABA Model Rules of Professional Conduct, which is the current ethical code. The prior ABA code was called the Model Code of Professional Responsibility, and this could be useful for historical research. I've given you a link to where you could find an unannotated version. There's also an annotated version that's available in print. So I mentioned to you briefly that what you really want to look at is the state code, but there's a real research value in the ABA code. So one thing you might need to do is find out how your state code varies from the ABA code. And I've given you a couple of ways to do that. You can look at the annotated version of your state code on Lexis or Westlaw, or in the print formats. The second one is the one I'm going to actually demo. So there's a list at the ABA website that's really helpful. And there's a secondary source called the ABA BNA Lawyer's Manual. This is a really great secondary source for all areas of research in legal ethics. And they do have something called a link, basically, to state ethics rules variations. One thing I want to point out is that the BNA Lawyer's Manual is available only on Westlaw Classic and Lexis.com, or from the BNA database list, the BNA databases which are listed on the Law Library's list of databases, which is the source that I prefer. And I'll show you how to get into that when we look at it on a different slide. Or you could look at it in print. Okay, but right now we're going to look at the ABA website. Okay, so I went to the ABA website. This is the Center for Professional Responsibilities website, and we're on their policy page. And there is some information here, including that unannotated version of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct. But what I was looking for was information on the state variations. So if we scroll down to the bottom and looked in the left-hand column, you'll see a couple of charts that look at the variations of the states, and we're going to look at charts comparing revised state rules to model rules. We're going to use Massachusetts as our example. And what I want to show you is it explains what Massachusetts did when it adopted the model rules of professional conduct. So Rule 1.0, Massachusetts chose not to adopt that rule. Rule 1.1, it was adopted exactly the same as the model rule. And Rule 1.2, they adopted Rule 1.2, but there were changes to the language. Okay, so that's some ways that we can find out how our state code might vary from the ABA model code. So let's talk now about how to find the actual state ethical codes online. So the ABA Center for Professional Responsibility, the website that we were just at, they also have links to state ethical codes, so the free versions that we could find online, And sometimes there's other information there, including ethics opinions, agency websites, those types of, even practice materials sometimes are linked there. The main way we're going to use in class is we're going to go onto Lexis and Westlaw, because those state ethical codes are going to be annotated versions, right? So really helpful for research. And where we're going to find them is we're going to look with the state materials along with the statutes. And one note is they're often going to be included with the rules of the state's highest court. That's how it is here in Massachusetts and a lot of other states. So let's look quickly on Westlaw Next. Okay, so I am on Westlaw Next right now. As I said, it's with the state materials. We're going to use Massachusetts again. And it's with statutes and court rules. And of course, at any point when you narrow down enough, you could search in your Go bar. And I said for Massachusetts, they're in the rules of the SJC. And I know it's Rule 3.07, so I'm going to scroll there. And you can look at the table of contents to get a sense of what's covered, but we're going to look at Rule 3.3, Candor toward the Tribunal. And what I want you to focus on is see how this looks like when we were looking at court rules or statutes. We get the text of the rule itself. We get links to how current it is. We get the editor's notes here. We have notes of decision, so those are our annotations. And we also have the history of this rule, citing references, and context and analysis. So we have additional editorial materials here, which is why we like to use the rules of professional conduct on Lexis or Westlaw. Okay, I want to quickly talk about finding it on Lexis Advanced because it's a little bit different. What you can do if you want a narrow search is you can use your limiting boxes underneath. You can limit the first one to statutes and legislation, because as I said, court rules will be in that database. I've limited my state to Massachusetts, and then you can even pick practice area legal ethics. And then I'm running a search that's going to get me that same rural candor within the same sentence as tribunal. And here's the court rule. And again, I want you to notice that we have the text of the rule, the commentary, and case notes. So this is an annotated version, which we can also shepherdize. Okay. And just as with statutes, we're going to be able to pick. So these are the different ways that the courts have cited to this rule. So how do we find court cases that interpret the state rules of professional conduct? I think I've already mentioned a couple ways. We can use the annotated version of your state rules either in print or online. We can key cite or shepherdize the state rule. We can use secondary sources, including the ABA BNA Lawyer's Manual is a really good source. I've kind of grouped these together, these 4 ways, because I think those are the easiest ways to find them. And then I wanted to talk about using case law databases. So this would be running natural language or terms and connector searches in a database. So on Westlaw Classic, I've given you some database identifiers for federal ethics case law, for a multi-database of state case law, and then the last one where it says XX, you would put in your state abbreviation. So that would be for Massachusetts MAETH-CS. Or we could go in by area of practice, again on Westlaw Classic to get to these databases. On Lexis.com, same way, go in by area of law. On Lexis Advanced, you could go in by practice area, or you could do something similar to what I just did, but not pick statutes, pick case law, and run a terms and connector and natural language search. So these are all different ways we could use different ethical case law databases, or we could use a general state case law database. Okay, I'm going to break this slideshow into 2 parts because we're getting kind of long here. So this is the end of part 1, where I gave you an introduction to rules of professional ethics, how to find rules of professional ethics. We talked a little bit about the ABA model rule, and we talked about finding state rules and how to find court cases interpreting those rules.